Hello, everyone, and welcome back. A warm welcome to the session Women for STEM. I'm Sophie Lambin, the editor partner for the Women's Forum. For those of you who are just joining us, you will be making sure to take your question, as many questions from the audience as possible. So please submit them in the chat box on the right of your screen. And also join and share this discussion on social media with the hashtag Women4Inclusion, WFG7, and Women4STEM. So Women4STEM is the topic of our session today. And in one of our last sessions earlier today, a speaker, Ulrike de Koon from AXA, warned us against the danger and potential pitfall of teleworking during crisis and how it tends to disproportionately impact women. So we are obviously all watching this virtual conference from our home, wherever you are. And as speakers today, we really discuss what future work trends will be accelerated by the crisis, and how, importantly, STEM skills, which is really the focus of our discussion here, can be a bridge to a more inclusive future of work for women, and importantly, what it will take. So to lead that conversation, it's my great pleasure to introduce Matt Krantz. Matt is a managing director and senior partner at Boston Consulting Group, and BCG is the knowledge partner of our Women4STEM Daring Circle. Matt heads BCG diversity and inclusion efforts. He's also been leading a study about the burden of COVID on working parents, and he's advised the US states as they reopen. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you, Matt, to introduce this session and then your speakers. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sophie, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be hosting this forum and engaging a bit further on how we think about remote work and gender and the skills that will be required to be successful. And in particular, I think back to our topic on Women4STEM. I am joined today by three colleagues. The first, Elena Vanetti, who is the Minister for Equal Opportunities and Family with the government of Italy. She has focused on the challenges and what it takes to create future work and equality, and how to think about and recently completed work on women for a new renaissance. Which really looks at the future of work and what is the requirements for the public and private sectors. So Elena, welcome. I'm also joined by Alexandra Palt, who is the Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer at L'Oreal, where I think L'Oreal is one of those leading companies at the front lines, both of the pandemic and how we support and respond. And Alexandra, I know L'Oreal has shifted and done things to make hand sanitizing and PPE equipment available to those more broadly and been at the front lines of it, but also as a leader, I think, as we think about women in STEM and diversity and what the work models of the future might be. And then third, we're joined by Katika Roy, who's the CEO of Pipeline, which looks at how gender and diversity and inclusion shape the future of our workforce, and how do we create a more vibrant and equal world, and works with HR departments on the specifics of how decisions and processes really impact what we do and how we advance diversity. And I think has some really interesting research and statistics that hopefully she'll share with some of us around the impacts on women, but on our economies really more broadly, and how we recover out of this pandemic going forward, and what will be critical. So thanks for the three of you for joining. Really appreciate you making the time and sharing some of your thoughts. So maybe let me start out, Katika, with you, and a broad question, which was really around, as we look at this pandemic and all the changes that are happening, and really we're in a world where we're kind of going through a forced experiment of work from home. And flexibility has been one of those things that has always been seen as a real enabler of gender and workforce diversity. But at the same time, I think there's probably some real risks that we're starting to see, and the divide of what's actually happening as you think about working from home, and what roles and jobs can be like that. And if you think about the kinds of skills that will emerge and be reinforced as valuable, and sort of the challenges to women and men as we think about these. How do you see the future of work within that shifting, and what does it really highlight to you around the challenges to increasing the diversity and the capabilities that we have in our workforce?
Thank you. So there's a lot to unpack there. So when we think about flexibility and the opportunity to work from home or work remotely, certainly we know that there is a relationship between that and more diverse workforce. The issue that we have seen, particularly during COVID, it was an issue before COVID-19, but has been exacerbated, particularly with schools being closed, is the increase in unpaid work for women in particular. We have seen that rise exponentially during COVID-19. More long-term, if you look at the number of companies, particularly tech companies, who tend to mostly be a bellwether of what the future of work will look like, and many of them have talked about either moving their workforces for the rest of 2020 from home, or employees can choose to work from home forever. The issue really becomes around visibility, and do we risk women in particular becoming invisible? And will that, one of the things that we know is that visibility and influence have an impact on upward mobility. And in this move to remote work, will women actually become less visible, and will we actually move backward in the future of work? And I think what's interesting about that, in particular for the topic that we're talking about in this panel, and STEM and Women4STEM, is the ability for advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence. We've already seen that take hold in the past couple of years, and actually accelerate through COVID-19. The opportunity to use advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence to ensure that that doesn't happen, to actually accelerate gender equity within the future of work.
I think those challenges, as you think about the differences of what shows up in the office versus what shows from home, and how you actually make your presence known, will be a real shift. Alexandra, I know at L'Oreal you've been thinking about people returning to work, and you've had people at L'Oreal who've been at work. And at the same time, I know that a lot of research shows that women continue to bear more of the mental and workload at home. And as you think about the return to work and the balance of everything with childcare and education, and whether schools are open or fully functioning or not, how is L'Oreal, and how have you started to think about that return to work, and what it means as you think about those jobs that actually never left because they were critical at the front line, but then the new world that Katika described, which is probably much more flexible and mixed. How does that impact the way women think about their roles, and about the way companies need to think about it?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. So first, I would like to say, yes, there are different issues that we have to tackle here, because first of all, of course, those who are working remotely are in general, were not those who were at the front line of the crisis. So for us, it is extremely important to thank all our employees and workers who made it possible to work to maintain the activity of the production of hand sanitizers during this activity, during the crisis, which we did with more than 20 million units and 40 million that we donated already. So there was a strong activity that brought a lot of people automatically to work. And then, so when we are coming out of confinement, we also think about, we take into account different factors. Of course, the first one is the security of our employees, all our employees. This is the most important one, and how can you guarantee a comeback in safe and health conditions and security for them. But I think for a company like L'Oreal, where over 50% of our leaders are women, more. So we have almost 60% of our brands that are managed by women. So we have a strong awareness of the issues that women are confronted with. And what Katika said is very true, and I think this is one of the most important things is we know that when you look, for example, across the OECD countries, that on an average, women have 4 hours of unpaid work a day, and men in general in the statistics around 2. So this crisis, of course, is not going to make things better or in that sense. And so how do we handle this? How can you have been in the fine balance between women who want to take care of their children, who have to accompany them, but at the same time also support that gender equality continues to progress? So I think this is it is a challenging issue. So we have taken some measures. I think it's a lot. We put a very central role also on the management team and the managers. In every manager has to have the discussion with the concerned women in order to understand the situation, because of course it's also not very fair to bring people back who have to take care of their children and have no solution. But it is definitely a challenge. And what I want to say is that if we do, it would be really a pity, like we did in a lot of other crises, that the analysis is coming afterwards when we see the gendered impact of the crisis on women. So we know that a crisis has always a negative impact on the employment of women, always. More women getting out of jobs. We know already that women have are more likely to get out of stable employment, that work attachment is lower for women in the OECD countries, and so on. So a crisis is never going to have, until as long as gender inequality is existing, and the crisis exacerbates inequalities. And so we have to take them into account now and not wait and see the consequences, because we know already in which direction this is going. So I think it is very important to act now on the experience of former crises we had.
Minister Vanetti, as mentioned, I think you've just completed some work as you look at the Women for a New Renaissance, and thinking about the skills and what's needed, as we talk about STEM and other things in the flexible workforce and the remote workforce of the future. But part of that is, what is the responsibility of government, and actually what is the responsibility of the private sector? And as you think about it, how do you see the responsibility of the private sector here in the role of the way work gets defined, and creating the skills needed to succeed, for women to succeed in that in the future?
Thank you very much. Let me say that I think that really this time, it has been a time of a high crisis, but at the same time, our challenge now is to transform this crisis in some opportunity for the future. So we have to recognize the signs of this time to project and dream also our future. And in our dream, in our responsibility, there is really a higher inclusion of women in our work world, but in all the parts of our society. For instance, the possibility of changing the way and the organization of the work could help women inclusion, but let me also say that the key word for this project of future we have in mind is sharing. We have to dare to share between men and women, in particular in carrying responsibility in families. This is true in particular in our society, in the organization of Italian society, but I think that this is a challenge for all the world. For instance, let me give you a datum. Before the coronavirus in Italy, only the 2% of employers were in smart working. With the pandemic, smart working became the only possibility we had for to work in all the sectors, or in many sectors. And this working modality that can be organized using really the help and the integral in the same project, sharing the responsibility from private sector and public sector, could represent a positive lever for our society, in particular to promote inclusion of women in the work and to have, as a result, a real empowerment of women. It is proved, data show this fact, that using smart working we can have a better balanced role within the family. And for instance, we have seen that if men are in the organization of smart working, they dedicate the 51% more time to domestic activities and caring activity in families. So really, this is a way, not only some welfare new adjustment in our society. I think that it is a paradigm of organization, of a better organization between to have the so-called work-life balance. Why we have to promote smart working to get a result of women empowerment and women involvement in the work. Someone showed that discuss to have some more justice in society. I think that this is true. There is also a problem of ensuring rights to everybody, to everyone, women and men at the same time. But I think that if we give the possibility to women to have a work, ensuring the possibility to have a good balance between families, they work in families and they work in their roles as employers, they can generate more benefits. And it is recognized that women represent really a value for the society, and that, I stop here to give also the possibility to make the next step. Women can represent the new form of renaissance for the future, sharing different ability. Women are multidimensional in their approach in problem solving. They share the part of the emotional part, the process or logical part, the elegance in demonstration, and in particular the possibility to include women in digital skills, in STEM works and so on, could give also to this kind of, to these fields and to this kind of activities a new way that I think could also help these activities to be more adaptive for future challenges we have to face in the next step of our challenge after the COVID-19.
So building off of your closing point there, I think this, the topic of ours is Women4STEM, and the issue as we pivot to more flexible work models and remote work models, STEM skills will be critical and important. Katika, when we were talking yesterday, I know you mentioned, and it's seen it over the statistics, that many of the jobs that are being lost are low wage and services skills jobs, and those disproportionately are impacting women. And we had a question from our audience that relates to this, which is, how do we think about closing the STEM skills gap, and how important is that to addressing the future work models and actually closing some of this gap about impact as it is on women? Maybe Katika, you could talk a little bit further about how you see the skilling and STEM in those roles critical for building gender equality and workplace positioning.
Sure, absolutely. So just to give some baseline statistics. Within the United States, 62% of minimum wage workers are women, and women make up 70% of the lowest paid workers. And they also bore the brunt. They were about 60% of the job losses, the 40 million job losses that have already happened in the United States. Most of those jobs cannot be done remotely. We know that the majority of jobs that can actually be done remotely are the higher paid jobs. They're not the services jobs. And we also know on a global scale that when we look at just, so STEM is kind of this large, category, but if you break that down into the future of work and the fourth industrial revolution, one skill in particular, which is artificial intelligence, has a fairly large gap. It's a 28-point gap. That is, women make up only 22% of all professionals in the artificial intelligence profession. And that is a growing profession, and it will continue to grow. So I think there's a couple of things when we look at STEM. One is looking at the millions of people, in particular women, who have lost their jobs, and how do we make investments both from an economic stimulus perspective, so the money that the governments are essentially pumping into the economy, but also public-private partnerships. There are structures within the United States and in the G7 where you can actually have public-private partnerships. So for instance, incenting a company like BCG or L'Oreal to invest, through apprenticeships, through these types of roles where we can actually move women from service jobs into technology jobs. That's one. That is not only the right thing to do, it's actually a good economic investment, because you are essentially upskilling and ensuring full employment, in particular for women. And that's good from an economic perspective because it increases your tax base. So it's good for governments. The other thing that we can do, more of a longer perspective, is actually look at embedding digital literacy as a standard within schools. There's obviously a large focus on math and literacy, and that's important, but digital literacy is just as important. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she learned to code before she could read, because coding is logic, and you can use pictures to teach kids how to code before they can read. And these are things that we can standardize to actually begin to close that pipeline more broadly. And it's a good investment in our recovery from COVID-19 and really catalyzing us into the future of work.
Alexandra, you talked a bit about the challenges, and so did Minister Vanetti, about work not being equally shared at home. And Katika talked about becoming more invisible when you are working remotely. What kinds of things do you see at L'Oreal, and are you trying to do that actually either help support how you enable that working from home and visibility, and what kind of things can managers do, and should they be aware of as they think about managing in this more diverse and remote work environment?
Well, yeah, I think I would like to link and build a little bit up on what Katika said on the part of on STEM and women in STEM. I think we have to talk about COVID-19, of course, but what was this crisis? Because there are a lot of other crises that are coming up that are still ahead of us. There is a economic and social crisis, but we will go now into a period of environmental crisis that is basically going to be permanent. And what role do women play in these different crises, and what role they can play? And of course, we know that women are disproportionately affected by all crises. But what we also see is the role they play, women in STEM particularly. I thought it was incredible during the crisis, and it is so revealing of the state where we are still. There was more than 70% of caretakers, nurses are women, and you still could see how few of them are at the highest level of hierarchy, because when you hear the doctors talking at the TV, you thought these were all guys, you know. I cannot, even if I try now, I had tried to find a woman that I can remember that talked at the television about the virus from a doctor's perspective, you know. So what we can see, we are not going to manage any crisis in the future if we do not have a more equitable contribution of women scientists to the design of the future. And I think this is really important. This is important in artificial intelligence. Of course, there are a lot of workers, but there are also there's a lot of research, there's a lot of designing the world of tomorrow that is going on. And in this design of tomorrow, women are still, and women scientists are still completely underrepresented. And I think this is, well, it is a risk for society, and it is a risk to create responses that fit both genders and that respond to both genders. And of course, there is an issue about proactively giving visibility and space. And this has to be an effort of all actors, public policy, private, ministers, associations, everybody. We have to, on a daily basis, be aware and contribute, and never anything let go on in this fight of making women and their contribution and women scientists' contribution visible.
Minister Vanetti, as you think about closing this skills gap, and you talked briefly about it, how might companies and government help reduce this STEM skills gap for women?
I think that there are different directions of our possible interventions, but let me talk now as a mathematician. Let me make precise the main hypothesis of our theorem, and this assumption, this main assumption of our action is that we know that the language for the future is mathematics. So because mathematics is the language of the STEM, and I think that it is the main point we have to focus. Starting from this hypothesis, we have to promote a new way of teaching. So there is the first direction is education. Then there is a second direction of our action, and it is formation, education for young generation and young girls, and then also promoting the new skills for women in all the ages of their lives. But the next direction is the organization to ensure inclusion of women in STEM works, but also to give the possibility of to women to change the way in which STEM are teaching, but also the STEM are used in the works. So for the first direction, the education, it's clear that we have in mind in Italy that there are different steps. For instance, we have seen that there is a gap concerning skills, for instance, in mathematics between girls and boys. In all the world, Italy is worse with respect to the other results. We have different from PISA research. We have a higher gap between the skills in mathematics between girls and boys with respect to the other countries. So the idea is that we have to change the pedagogy and the way in which we teach mathematics. And we have to fight also the stereotypes. In our world, I think that a girl thinks that mathematics is something for men because it is not emotional and which is not adaptable to describe the possibility to have sentiment and so on, and this is not true. There is a way, of women, also to make demonstration of theorems. So the way in which girls can solve exercises, it is more elegant, more able to capture the details. And there is also an aspect. Mathematics also is can be used to produce the possibility of have some more courage and to risk more for girls. It is proved that girls can risk less than boys because they do things if they know things, and mathematics can help this process. I think that the high risk, high gain, which is one of the main point of a project in Europe for the research, for high research, could help also the empowerment of women starting from schools. The second step is the promotion of new competence, new abilities, new skills for women. And in particular, there is the problem of the so-called digital skills between men and women, also for workers. So our idea is to have some project also with the private companies to promote digital formation and digital reskilling of women. For instance, I think to women which are over than 65 years old, I think to women which work or live in rural part, which are less digital skilled. But also, I think to women which are in parental leave for maternity, and this is a way to produce some value also in this time, to have the possibility then to use this skill also once they come back to work. And finally, the possibility to organize, for instance, academic and research works, ensuring a balance between the presence of men and women, and this can be do, I think, with the positive actions. For instance, to promote a research project in which the measure of the balance, the gender balance in the team proposing this work and so on, could be a positive point. And we have also an idea to introduce some inclusion impact index for private company to measure the gender mainstreaming of the policies of these companies, but at the same time to give some instrument to project, not only to measure ex post, but also to project ex ante the policies, ensuring some empowerment of women and gender equality. Let me also say that in this work, the equality, gender equality, we have to recognize the necessity, the one important point is that we have to promote the relation between two differences, men and women together, to have a complete sight, a perspective, a good perspective of the future, and not only to promote a model of the same model both for men and women, but we have to promote the diversity of models to have really a model which is given by the interaction between the diversity. This is, I think, the challenge of the inclusion, and this is the challenge to make the diversity an instrument also in STEM works and in STEM studies to get more results for the next challenges of our work.
And Minister Vanetti, maybe I turn to my last question that I'll ask each of you to respond to, which is if you were to think about your ask or message to the G7 that would be important in order to ensure an inclusive and diverse workforce, going forward? What would your couple of things be that you would ask of the G7?
I hope that this time could be really the right time to reach the empowerment of women, and the empowerment of women is necessary to get the empowerment for all the citizens, and to give the possibility of promoting this empowerment, we have not only to protect, to make action of protection, but really action of promotion. And to reach this purpose, we have to give women really the possibility of learning the language of the future, which is, I think, really the language of the work, but also to contribute to change this language, to make this language more complete, sharing both the part of the scientific part and humanistic part. This is the way of the human being of the Renaissance, and I think that we have to explore this new way of learning and of working.
Alexandra, what would your key thoughts and messages be?
Yeah, well, we at L'Oréal, we have a program since 20 years that is called so for Women in Science, and what we see, and I think this is a very, very clear message for me to everybody. Even the most excellent women scientists face obstacles in their careers in public, and even more in the public sphere than in the private sphere. So I think it is now time, and I think this is really a message for the political leaders of the world, that it is not just sufficient to always say, well, women have to get trained and women have to get empowered. Of course, all this is necessary, but we also need some political will now to really end discrimination and to make policies work that allow women to put their talent into the pool of talents necessary to solve the world's problem. And so I think there is still a lot of issues that have come back, and I think we should support that. That is not just all the things that women can do to make their career, but we have to fight discrimination and harassment that is still very prevalent, and especially prevalent also in science.
Katika, would you like to give us the round closing thoughts around how we can actualize this?
Sure. I have 4 asks. So the first one, and I agree with Alexandra, that undervaluing women is a huge issue. But the first ask is to embed gender equity in the future of work through STEM education. So both in schools, as well as using this opportunity with so many people who are unemployed to upskill and reskill people. We need more people in STEM. We should use this as an opportunity to invest. The second is to ensure that economic stimulus packages that are going out and will continue to go out use gender budgeting so that they're gender mainstreamed. That hasn't happened yet, not on a global scale, and it needs to, because otherwise what happens is that women not only bear the brunt of the economic crisis on the front end, that is now, they don't have enough money to make it through the 12 or 16 weeks or however long this will happen, but they also will suffer from austerity measures that will come at the end of this, because at some point we have to pay for the economic stimulus that we're pumping into the economy. The third is to actually ensure that we're shoring up female-founded companies. We know that in the United States, for instance, there's an $11 billion gap in funding in venture-backed female founders. We need to close that gap. That is not only the right thing to do, it is actually an investment in the velocity of our economic recovery. Female founders have been proven again and again to be a very good investment. They return more on invested capital. And so we should shore that up through economic stimulus. And then the last would be to ensure that as we move to remote work, I mean, I didn't even read off the just a sampling of the companies that have now talked about working from home, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Amazon or Slack, etc. But we need to think about how we use advanced technologies like artificial intelligence to ensure gender equity in the future of work. There is not going to be going back to the way things were. We have the opportunity right now through the decisions that we make to ensure an acceleration toward gender equity. And a huge part of that is advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence. And so my last and fourth ask to the G7 is to incentivize that, to figure out how to incentivize public-private partnerships so that, to Alexandra's point, we can eradicate things like discrimination, like undervaluing of female talent. We should be investing in that now.
So Minister Vanetti, Katika, Alexandra, thank you for sharing your thoughts today. Appreciate it very much. I know this is a wide-ranging and rapidly changing environment. I think the ideas that you put forward on how do we bring more equality and more opportunity and the critical nature that STEM and reskilling are going to play in making that happen. And Sophie, I will turn it back over to you, and some of the asks from this group to the G7, hopefully we can help make happen. And Sophie, I think you're still on mute.
Still.
I think I will say on Sophie's behalf that we appreciate you being here, and that the next session will be starting up soon. We'll have a short break. You can stretch your legs, but I hope you join us as we go on to the next one, which is really around women for AI and other topics that actually really, I think we've teed up here, are critical as we go into the future work environment. So thank you for being with us, and have a good day.